for Ann and Pastor, and then we'll go ahead and get into the lesson today. Father, Lord, I just ask that you still each and every one of us, spirit, soul, and body. And Lord God, we are just so grateful that we can gather together. And Lord, we can do it in safety and not worried about what anybody else thinks. Lord God, you have just been so gracious to us. Thank you for the written word that you have given us, Lord, that we would rightly divide it and hide the word in our hearts, Lord. And Father, I just lift up Sister Ann and Pastor tonight to you in particular, that God, that you would just strengthen Ann and just give her peace and wisdom, Lord. And I pray for Pastor as his body heals, that Lord, that this blood would be rapidly absorbed back into his body so that he can be back to his full self, doing everything that he loves, which is standing in the pulpit and loving on the people that you have placed underneath him. As we go through the word of the Lord tonight to Job, or through Job to us, that Father, that you would open our eyes and that we would see, hear, and receive your truth and your truth only. Lord, help us not to come at it with our preconceived or pre-taught wrong ideas, but help us to walk in your truth according to your plan and your purpose for each and every one of our lives. We just give you the praise and the glory in Jesus' name. Amen. Oh, hallelujah. First and foremost, we always have to start with what we did the week before. We always have to start with our review. So remember, Job is poetry. 2 chapters, beginning and end, are not. The whole rest of the book is poetry. So anytime we're looking and reading poetry, you have to remember it's a lot of figures of speech. It's a lot of exaggeration. There's a lot of passionate speech. As we do our lessons, you have to understand who is speaking and to whom is and who is being spoken to. And the speaker will always be speaking from his perspective according to his own knowledge, his own ignorance, his own bias, and his own preconceived ideas. So as our review from last, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. What do you remember about Job? He was blameless.
Had integrity.
He had integrity.
He was upright.
He was upright.
He was honest.
He was honest, that's true.
And he was the best, wasn't he the best man in the land?
He was considered, yes, in the land. He was the best in the East. And that he attributed all of that to the provision or the blessings of God. And we also see from chapter 1 that God himself reaffirmed to us that Job truly was blameless, upright, fearing evil. So we know that he was a great man. He had a large family. He had many possessions. And then we have a conversation between two people, call them people. And that was God the Father and Satan. And God had to give Satan permission to do anything to Job. His power is limited. And then when we get in chapter 2, well, in chapter 1 we see he loses all of his possessions and he loses his children. And then we get into chapter 2 and Satan comes back to God and says, okay, God, skin for skin. Skin for skin. He didn't curse you because you took everything away from him, but you didn't touch his skin. He's willing to give up everything. But when you touch his physical body, if you would let me at it, he will curse you. So God said, okay, I'm going to let the hedge down more, but I'm still going to leave that hedge partially up. You may not take his life. You may only touch his body. You may not take his life. And what does he do? He touches his body. He covers him with boils from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. Two things. He had to ask permission, and God still has a hedge. Satan's power is not limitless. It is limited. Remember we talked last week, Satan is not the opposite of God. He is a created being. He is an angel, and he has to answer to God the Father. Okay, so we see all of that from the first couple of chapters. We get into chapter 3, and Job's friends come, his 3 friends. Love 3 friends like Job, please deliver me from them. In the very beginning, everything that they do is great because they come, they see Job, and they're basically
was suffering God's discipline. And by the way, I know what I'm talking about because I had a vision from God. This was Eliphaz and how he spoke to God. So let's get into chapter 6. So we see that Job's friends have been kind and sympathetic, and as they sat with him for 7 days in silence, but when they broke the silence is when everything is falling apart. And now we have Job in chapter 6 answering Eliphaz. So let's look at verses 1 through 3 first. It says, "Then Job answered, 'Oh, that my grief were actually weighed and laid in the balances together with my calamity. For then it would be heavier than the sand of the seas. Therefore my words have been rash.'" Now, I want you to picture a balance scale, the old balance scales in the butcher shop. Okay, here's your meat, and here he starts dropping the weights until you get to the right weight. So what Job is saying is, here I am on the scale, and you keep heaping more weight on me than I can possibly bear. You're supposed to be encouraging me. I'm suffering, and you are making it worse. You have made a wrong assumption or wrong analysis of my problems. Yes, my words were indeed rash, but it's because of my excessive grief, my excessive pain. You don't understand my crying out because you don't know my pain. You have judged me for my rash words without any pity or any compassion. And think about how we deal with people. Sometimes we'll look at the situation and we'll go ahead and give them our advice without knowing what's going on in their lives. Okay, so that's basically what we see here from his friends. Then we get to verse 4. It says, "For the arrows of the Almighty are within me. Their poison my spirit drinks. The terrors of God are arrayed against me." Now, this is an absolute description of what Job feels like or what he felt like. An arrow comes swiftly and suddenly out of nowhere. Have you ever watched an archery contest? They knock the arrow and it's there in the target. You almost don't even see it go through. That's how fast it is. So Job is saying, he says, this is how I feel. All of this has come swiftly and suddenly out of nowhere. And this is how the calamities came against Job. He lost his stock, then he lost his children, and now he's covered with boils. So calamities have befallen him, one after another, as an arrow does. Verse 5, it says, "Does the wild donkey bray over his grass, or does the ox low over his fodder? Can something tasteless be eaten without salt, or is there any taste in the white of an egg? My soul refuses to touch them. They are like loathsome food to me." So Job's saying here, he says, look, I'm not complaining without reason. Just as a donkey doesn't bray and an ox doesn't low if it's fed good food, neither would I complain without a cause. All you have given me with your advice, Eliphaz, is tasteless and useless food. You have given me absolute nothing of substance for my health and or my strength. You have given me no compassion, you've given me no consolation, but rather you have been a judge, saying, I deserve all of this suffering. And I think some of us felt like that every now and then, that somebody's judging us as we're going through suffering when we're not really being judged, or we're not suffering for something in our life, but we caught the tail end of somebody else's. Okay? So verse 8, "Oh, that my request might come to pass, and that God would grant my longing. Would that God were willing to crush me, that he would loose his hand and cut me off. But it is still my consolation, and I rejoice in unsparing pain, that I have not denied the words of the Holy One." If you go on to page 24 of your homework, what did you discern or learn from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 through 8, and how we should deal with somebody like Job who is suffering in these kind of conditions?
That God comforts us in our afflictions so that we can comfort others in theirs.
Okay, God comforts us in our affliction so that we can comfort others in theirs, okay?
I wrote that almost word for word. suffering, there is reward for it.
When we endure suffering, there is reward for it. It doesn't feel like it when we're in the middle of it, does it? Okay. Irma?
Even spiritually strong people, men, can despair. No one is immune to suffering.
Exactly. No one is immune to suffering. It doesn't matter how strong that you are or you think you are. None of us are immune. Mary, did you have something?
It produces in us patience.
Suffering does produce patience in us. Yes, it does. Okay. Anything else?
Okay, listen, everything you said is absolutely correct. So if God is the Father, God is the Father of all mercies and comfort, then we should extend the same comfort and mercy to those hurting that He has extended to us. If someone is hurting, if someone is suffering, we need to make certain that they understand that we understand. They understand that we understand that they don't have to say the correct word right at that moment. Because in the heat of suffering, sometimes you will not say the correct thing.
And believers are to patiently endure and look to God and other believers for comfort. And that's when your phone rings and says, okay, I can't tell you exactly what, but would you be praying for me today?
Or when you see somebody at church and you just have like this little quickening in your spirit, you just walk up and put your arms around them and love them. Hug them. Don't need to say a word. I'm here. Love. Okay. And then Job goes back to his complaint again to back to chapter 3, where he wants to die, that he wished he was never out of his womb, started at his mother's womb, starting in verse 6, 8 through 10 here. It says he's mourned the day of his birth, and he believed that he'd be better off dead. But keep in mind, through all of this, every time Job, and we're going to see him wish for death multiple times this week, that he never ever contemplated suicide. His wish was always that God would end his life. You know, it's like the arrows coming swiftly. God, would you please just send one of these arrows all the way through so I can be out of my suffering? And God, would you please just loose your hedge of protection around me? Remove your hand. Let these arrows do my death blow. We see that Eliphaz is calling Job basically a hypocrite. So he's answering Eliphaz and saying, Eliphaz, I am not a hypocrite. Through all my pain and through all my calamity, I am innocent. My consolation is, verse 10, my consolation is that I have not said what is wrong about God. He says, my consolation is that I am innocent before God. I reject your words, and that's my comfort. I have not said ill about God, and I will rejoice in my unsparing pain, because I still know that God is who He said He is. As we look at 11 through 13, he says, what is my strength that I should wait? And what is my end that I should endure? Is my strength the strength of stones, or is my flesh bronze? Is it that my help is not within me, and that deliverance is driven from me? So he says, it's still my consolation that I have not denied the words of the Holy One. And then he goes on to say, what kind of strength do I really have? Is it the strength of stones? Is it the strength of bronze? Remember, Job is sitting on an ash heap covered in boils. He has lost everything. He keeps scraping himself with a potsherd to try to get some type of relief. And he's reflecting on the hopelessness of his situation.
And when we deal with people, and no matter what situation they're in, they're dealing with what they feel is a hopeless situation. And he goes on to say, he says, look, I'm not stone or bronze. I don't have any strength to face the future. And this is something that reflects his absolute helplessness. He recognizes that his only help is, if his only help is through himself, he has no help at all. Because he doesn't have the strength of a rock, and he doesn't have the body or the strength of bronze. And if you want to flip over to verse 14. For the despairing man there should be kindness from his friend, so that he does not forsake the fear of the Almighty. My brothers, and you noticed he didn't say Eliphaz, he says, my brothers, plural, have acted deceitfully like a wadi, like the torrents of wadis which vanish, which are turbid because of ice, and into which the snow melts. When they become waterless, they are silent. When it is hot, they vanish from their place. The paths of their course wind along. They go up into nothing and perish. The caravans of Tema looked. The travelers of Sheba hoped for them. They were disappointed, for they had trusted. They came there, and they were confounded. Indeed, you have now become such. You see a terror, and you are afraid. Have I said, give me something, or offer a bribe for me from your wealth, or deliver me from the hand of the adversary, or redeem me from the hand of the tyrants? So he says here, listen, I am a despairing man. And what you have done is not offer me kindness. You've not offered me any kind of friendship. Even if I had turned my back or walked away from the Almighty, you should have comforted me and loved me and pointed me back in the right direction. The ESV translation says, verse 14 this way, it says, he who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. I really kind of like that better, because when we don't offer kindness to a friend, what we're doing is being disobedient to God. So we are forsaking the fear of the Almighty. So stop and just ponder and think about that one for a little bit.
And we see that in verse 15, brothers is collective. So it appears here that Job believes from the silence or the attitude of the other two at this point in time are showing their agreement with Eliphaz, because they don't seem to be trying to contradict him in any way. And then in verse 21, he says, you have indeed offered me no help. I have not asked you for anything. All I wanted were words of comfort, and I've heard none. But what happened to you is you became like a wadi. You were full of comfort. You were full of sympathy, and you should have been giving it out. But instead, you are like a wadi that is full during rainy season or snow. But as soon as the sun comes out, you become dried up, and you are useless. You are no help to anyone. So he's equating his friends with what happens to a wadi in that part of the country. Let's look at verse 24. It says, teach me and I will be silent, and show me how I've erred. He says, look, I don't see any sin in my life. How painful are honest words, but what does your argument prove? Do you intend to reprove my words when the words of one in despairing belongs to the wind? And in other words, he says, my words are out of my pain. You have to listen. They're just out of my pain. You would even cast lots for the orphans and barter over your friend. Now, please look at me and see if I lie to your face. Desist now, let there be no injustice. Even desist. My righteousness is yet in it. Is there injustice on my tongue? Cannot my palate discern calamities? He's getting kind of right down here talking to him. He says, look, what's going on here?
Throughout this whole dialogue with Eliphaz, what Eliphaz has done to Job is he's insinuated. And all of his insinuations are totally without substance. So all that Eliphaz can do is to suggest that Job's attitude has been wrong. And Job is coming back. He says, no, my attitude's not wrong. Here Job is starting to retaliate, or seems to be retaliating, with charges of his own to Eliphaz. Basically, he's saying, you overwhelm the fatherless and you undermine your friends. Are people mere things to you? Are friends just items for profit? So he's telling Eliphaz, everything you're saying and doing is not right. As a matter of fact, this is how you are exactly coming across to everyone. And then he says, look at me, I'm not lying. I'm not concealing anything from God, and I am not concealing anything from you. You need to understand that this calamity that I'm going through is not judgment for some hidden sin. And then the words, teach me, show me, what does your argument prove, to your argument. It doesn't matter what your vision said, there is no proof to your argument. Basically, he's saying, look, I may be in great pain, but I'm not stupid. I can discern the injustice of your attitude. And then we get to verse 30. When we go back to verse 30, it goes back to the analogy of the animals from before. And basically, if Eliphaz's words had comforted and satisfied Job, he would not have cried out as he had done in chapter 3 or in chapter 6, verse 6. He would not have wanted to die. What Job is saying is, Eliphaz, your words were flavorless food. They were loathsome. And Job can discern the unsavory character of Eliphaz's words. And we see that in that passage that we just read. Now, once again, these are not going to be easy chapter things. But as you did your homework, did you come up with the chapter title? Don't everybody jump in at once.
Yes.
Okay, Miss Lynn?
Pain expressed is pain released.
Pain expressed is pain released. Oh, I like that, yeah. Mary? Mary always gives me the look.
I put Job's friends are no help.
That is so true. Job's friends are no help.
Or my complaints is just.
My complaint is just. Okay. All right, I'll just give you a few. Job in despair, but consoled and comforted. But consoled or comforted that he had not denied the Holy One. In all of these things, Job did not lie with his lips or sin with his lips. He never denied the Holy One through all of his pain. Now, as much trouble as these chapter titles are to do sometimes, their purpose is when you look at them, you can remember the content of that chapter. So if that'll help you in the future, whatever will help you remember that chapter, that's what you want for your chapter title. Okay? And the same title is not going to work for all of us because we all remember things just a little bit differently.
And now that gets us into chapter 7. And this is Job's continuing response to to Eliphaz from chapters 4 and 5. Let's do 1 through 5. Is not man forced to labor on earth? And are not his days like the days of a hired man? As a slave who pants for the shade, and as a hired man who eagerly waits for his wages. So am I allotted months of vanity, and nights of trouble are appointed me? When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise? But the night continues, and I'm continually tossing until dawn. My flesh is clothed with worms and a crust of dirt. My skin hardens and runs. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and come to an end without hope. That's very picturesque of how Job is feeling here. When we look at verse 1, it says, is not man forced to labor on earth, and are not his days like the days of a hired man? The idea here is of military service. The Latin Vulgate translated this as the life of man is warfare upon earth. Cloverdale, which was an early English translation, does it this way: is not the life of man upon the earth a very battle? I can tell you what, for my life, and I can look at some faces and I know from your lives, life has been a battle. And it doesn't look like Job wanted to be drafted into this battle. He was unwillingly and unwittingly drafted into this battle. So we see Job communicating with the struggle of life, not even understanding why he's there or how he got there. Because remember, he doesn't know chapter 1 and 2. We know chapter 1 and 2. And he has insomnia. He says, when I lie down, I say, when do I get to rise up? But the night continues. He says, I'm tossing and turning until dawn. For those of us who have spent nights of insomnia, it's awful. You can watch that clock go around and around. It's like, I can't wait to get up. And then you get up and I'm so tired and depressed, I can't wait to go back to bed. But the night continues, the night continues. And then he starts addressing, he says, my flesh is clothed with worms and a crust of dirt. and my skin hardens and runs. And then in verse 6, he says, and my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and they are coming to end without hope. And then verse 7, he says, remember that my life is but breath. My eye will not again see good. The eye of him who sees me will behold me no longer. Your eyes will be on me, but I will not be. When a cloud vanishes, it is gone. So he who goes down to Sheol does not come up. He will not return again to his house, nor will his place know him anymore. When we look at verses 6 through 10, we see that in his inner turmoil, as well as his physical condition. In this particular time frame, his affliction is causing time to drag on for him. Sleepless night, painful nights, the ash heap. It seems his life is meaningless, is a meaningless blur. It's spent without hope. He says, I'm just a breath. And Job believes at this point in time that his only release from pain is his physical death. We've seen that in every chapter that Job has said anything. He says, I long for death. I wish I had never been conceived. I should have gone from the womb to the tomb. So he's just beside himself with pain and suffering. And then therefore, remember therefore is therefore a reason? Therefore, because of everything I have just said, because of everything that has just happened to me, therefore I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Let's just stop there and we'll talk about it. All right, so it seems here from the beginning of verses 7 that Job is probably talking to God at this point and not Eliphaz. It says, therefore, because of all that's preceded, because of all of this in my bitterness in my body, he says, I am in anguish. And then we go over to verse 12. I have flip pages here. It says, am I the sea or the sea monster that you have to set a guard over me? God, I am not unpredictable. I'm not dangerous. You don't need to have this kind of guard over me. If I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so that my soul would choose suffocation, death, rather than my pains. His physical suffering was so intense and so prolonged, he was denied the comfort of sleep, he was frightened with dreams and visions. But we also see now his inward struggle.
His very soul is now desiring of death. So we've seen Job go from just the physical pain, now we see him starting to go into the inward struggle. So we see kind of switching to now we're going to see how his spirit man, or who he truly is inside, start to suffer. So we see his attitude is absolute misery in verse 16. He says, I waste away, I will not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but breath. God, leave me alone. I'm in misery. Just let me die. Verse 17, what is man that you magnify him, and that you are concerned about him? This reminds us of Psalm 8:4 and Psalm 144:3. Just write those down and go back and look at them at some other point. Psalms 8:4 and Psalms 144:3. And then verse 19. Verse 18. That you examine him every morning and you try him every moment. Will you never turn your gaze away from me, nor let me alone until I swallow my spill? God, look away for just a minute. Just a minute, God, just a minute. Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me, but I will not be. So Job is now asking questions of God. At this moment, he feels that God's attention on him is very unwelcome. If all of this calamity is from God, why can't you just leave me alone? When it talks in verse 17 about
you magnify man. It's, why are you concerned about me? Just, what are you that you're mindful of me? Just go away from me for a little bit. Verse 19, when it talks about until I swallow my spittle, that's an Arabic idiom for one instant. Now, Paul uses in the blink of an eye in the New Testament, and that's the same thing. That's what Job is wanting. Just a blink of an eye, just an instant. Just a little bit of relief. What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Please, God, just leave me alone. How have I wronged you? Job could not understand why he seemed to be God's target. If he had sinned to cause all this suffering, he wants God to tell him, or pardon my transgression. And you have to remember the time frame that Job is in. He is between Noah and Abraham. So there's no law given. There's no sacrificial system. So what he knows is what has been handed down from the ancestors, from Adam to Noah. And we also know from chapter 1 that he was making sacrifices for his children. So if he's doing sacrifices for his children, you know he's doing sacrifices for himself. So what he's saying is, God, if I've sinned, I've sacrificed everything that I know that I do. When we look at verse 20, the last of verse 20 is translated into the Septuagint and the earliest Hebrew manuscripts as, have I become a burden to you? Instead of, so that I'm a burden to myself. The earliest Hebrew manuscripts are, have I become a burden to you? Which makes more sense to me, that Job is thinking that he is more of a burden to God. This quote from Spurgeon I really liked. It says, once more, we benefit from knowing the story behind the story, which Job and his friends do not know at this point in the narrative. Job believed that God was against him and was punishing him, but it wasn't true. Job was not being punished, he was being honored. God was giving to him a name like that of the greatest of the great ones of the earth. The Lord was lifting him up, promoting him, and putting him in the front rank. Job doesn't know this, but we have the great honor of knowing what's going on. In verse 21, we see that he is just, his desire is to escape both life and God.
This is a quote from Mike Mason in his book, The Gospel According to Job. Just throwing this out for us to think about. We like to talk about having faith to be healed, but what about having faith to be sick? I looked at Johnny Erickson Tada.
Yes.
I mean, look at the faith that woman has, and look at the ministry that she has had. That's just one example that came to me on the top of my head. So put that down as one of your thought questions. What about having faith to be sick? All right, so that is basically the end of chapter 7. So once again, what have you got for a title?
I put seeking either pardon for my sin or give me death.
Seeking pardon for my sin or give me death.
One or the other. Let's just one or the other.
Anybody else? Kirby, you have something? No, she's shaking her head no. Okay.
But my note says, Job's life seems futile.
Job's life seems futile. Yes, it does. And actually, that's one of the things that I have on the side of my sheet is part of the chapter of divisions. I will relate something in one of my Job experiences, so to speak. When my children were very little, Brenda was probably only 3 or 4, I became quite ill. I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me, he said, I've never seen anybody as sick as you, not in the hospital. I couldn't swallow, couldn't eat, high fever. I could do nothing. And I was laying in bed, and the 2 young girls were on fire Pentecostal prayer warriors that used to take care of Brenna at La Petite Academy, because she was only like 3 years old. And they came over one day, and I had been laying in bed. I mean, I couldn't even talk to Pete. If I needed him, I would take something at the side of the bed and throw it at the wall so he would know to walk back and check on me. And he was taking me to the doctor every day for shots or medication or something. I couldn't swallow pills, so I had to go in and get the shots. And I laid in bed that day and says, God, you've got to kill me or cure me because I cannot take any more. And these two girls came over and said, we have been praying for you and praying for you. It's like they were battling to take you away and we weren't going to let them have you. So I understand, I have bumps again. I understand a Job experience because I had reached that point that I could not take one more minute and it would have been better just to die. For me, probably not for my kids, but for me. So then we get to chapter 8.
And the new guy on the block is Bildad. Yes. Now, Bildad's name, which I think every one of you will love, is Bildad means son of contention. And Bildad was a traditionalist, and he was much more argumentative than Eliphaz. There's a possibility that he is a descendant of Shua, who was Abraham's son by Keturah, and you see that or Keturah. You see that in Genesis 25, 1 and 2. Let's look at 1 through 7. It says, Then Bildad the Shuhite answered, How long will you say these things? And the words of your mouth be a mighty wind. Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert what is right? If your sons sinned against him, then he delivered them to the power of their transgression. If you would seek God and implore the compassion of the Almighty, if you were pure and upright, surely now he would rouse himself for you and restore your righteous estate. Though your beginning was insignificant, yet your end will be greatly increased. Deliver me from a friend like Bildad. He rebukes Job. And it's the same rebuke of Eliphaz. And he dismisses Job's defense of himself in chapter 6 and 7 as a strong wind. You see no word of apology from him. You see no touch of sympathy. You see no attempt to calm Job or to soothe him. He is a traditionalist that sees everything as black or white, and he prides himself as such.
You know, we know a lot of black and white people. I am one. Linda is also. But I would hope that the Holy Spirit has tempered us so that we're not prideful that we are traditionally black and white people. You're right, or excuse me, you're wrong, and I'm right. Bildad is, you're wrong, and that's it. So we see that he is totally black and white. He's really quick to rebuke Job. He doesn't stop to consider why Job has spoken the way that he has. He's heard Job's words, but he didn't consider his pain. And we see that Bildad in verse 3, does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert what is right? We see that Bildad's confidence is in the justice of God. But the idea is that Job can only receive calamity from God because it's punishment for sin. He has kind of a right idea with a wrong application. And then verse 4, it says, if your son sinned against him, then he delivered them into the power of their transgressions. Can you just imagine everything that Job has gone through? Now Bildad has started to harp on him instead of comfort him. And then he starts to throw his son's sinfulness up in his face. And by the way, Job, you're getting ready to receive the same thing if you don't repent. And he's arrogant. Basically saying, Job, your children got what they deserve and you are going to too. Verse 5, if you would seek God and implore the compassion of the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, surely he would now rouse himself for you and restore your right estate. Job, all you have to do is earnestly seek God. You only have to be pure and upright. If you were pure and upright, you would be earnestly seeking God. Once again, they don't know what's happening behind the scenes in the heavenly realms. Bildad is saying, this is the cause and this is the effect. You're a sinner, you're being punished. In verse 7, what he's Though your beginning was insignificant, yet your end will increase greatly. He's both right and wrong in this, and we're going to start with the wrong. He assumed that because Job had lost everything, because he wasn't in prosperity and abundance, proved that he was not pure and upright and seeking repentance. He is right because in the end, Job does increase abundantly, and we'll find that out in 41:10. So he's wrong, and then he's right. Verses 8 through 10, it says, "Please inquire of past generations, and consider the things searched out by their fathers. For we are only of yesterday and know nothing, because our days on earth are as a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you and bring forth words from their minds?" Job, you have to consider the traditions of the past, all the learning of the past. You would see that sinners get just punishment and good men are blessed with health and prosperity. Cause and effect from human perspective. Tradition will kill you every time. It doesn't matter if it's church doctrine, it doesn't matter if it's a tradition of a teacher, whatever you have been ingrained with is tradition that's contrary to the Word of God. Get rid of the tradition, because it is death. It is only the Word of God that is the truth. This is a quote from Warren Wiersbe. It says, "To be sure, we can today learn from the past, but the past must be a rudder to guide us into the future and not an anchor to hold us back. The fact that something was said years ago is no guarantee that it is right. The past contains as much folly as wisdom." Just think about what some of the past things have been handed down that are just so wrong. Think about let's say 70 or 80 years, 100 years ago. If you wore makeup or you wore gold jewelry and you were of certain denominations, you were a hussy. I mean, you couldn't wear pants. And does anybody have a dress on today? Nothing wrong with pants. Just checking, I don't know. So anyways, we have to make sure that we're not holding on to tradition and holding that over the value of the Word of God. And then we get to see more of Bildad and what his examples are. It says, "Can the papyrus grow up without a marsh? Can the rushes grow without water? While it is still green and not cut down, yet it withers before any other plant. So are the paths of all who forget God, and the hope of the godless will perish." It says, "Whose confidence is fragile, and whose trust a spider's web." Bildad is using all these wonderful, vivid imaginations in the natural world, but he's misapplying them to Job and his situations. Natural cause and effect has absolutely nothing to do with the spiritual and moral part of a man. There is cause and effect in nature, but you can't apply nature's cause and effect to our spirituality or our morality. So Bildad's right in his statements of truth and totally wrong in his application or his deductions as far as Job is concerned. Verses 19 through 22. I'm sorry, we're on one page here. I'm sorry, let's go to 15. "He trusts in his house, but it does not stand. He holds fast to it, but it does not endure. He thrives before the sun, and his shoots spread out over his garden. His roots wrap around a rock pile. He grasps a house of stones. If he is removed from his place, then it will deny him, saying, 'I never saw you.' Behold, this is the joy of his way, and out of the dust others will spring. Lo, God will not reject a man of integrity, nor will he support the evildoers. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouting. Those who hate you will be clothed with shame, and the tent of the wicked will be no more." So Bildad here has got, once again, he's giving, okay, do you trust in the spider's web? Because they're strong and they catch things, but listen, something can hit them and then they're gone. The same thing, how are you building your house? It's going to be removed, and then it's going to be like, "I never saw you. You were here for a moment and gone for a moment and gone in the next moment." I keep going back, do you build your house on the rock, or do you build your house on the sinking sand? So we build our house on the rock in Jesus Christ. Bildad and Eliphaz are building their house on sinking sand.
Because they are not saying what is right about God. They are not saying what is right about Job. So what we have here is Bildad having the same basic message Eliphaz, that Job needs to turn to God. Bildad had an extremely simple theology, that everything could be explained in terms of two types of men: the blameless, which is used in is chapter 8, verse 20, and used of Job in chapter 1 and 2, and the secretly wicked, which is used in chapter 8, verse 13. The men look outwardly the same. So this is Bildad's simple theology. The men look the same, but God can distinguish them by blessing or prospering the blameless and by destroying the wicked. If you're Linda and I look alike. We're both professing believers in Jesus Christ. We both come to church every Sunday. But God blesses Linda abundantly. And poor me, I get discipline, I get punishment, I get everything else. So according to Bildad, Linda's the righteous, innocent one, and I am not. Can we see the falsehood in that? Because what does Scripture say? He reigns on the just and the unjust, right? And I should have written down the psalm that says that the wicked have everything they're going to have now, because when they die, they have nothing. So we know that this is not a true statement, or his belief system is not very good. So the problem with Bildad is that he doesn't seem to have a knowledge of God. He seems to have a knowledge of God, but he doesn't know God. He talks a lot, but we never see Eliphaz and Bildad pray. He hangs on to the wisdom of the ancients and his own belief system, but very little experience. And that's what we have to be, on guard about. What is our belief system? Does it hinge on what someone else has taught us, or does it hinge on the truth of the Word of God? Do we know about God, or do we know God? There is such a huge difference in that. And, Paul tells us, I think it's in Corinthians, he says, listen, examine yourself to see whether or not you are truly in the faith. And what else does he tell us? Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Yes, I'm a born-again believer, but then I now have responsibility. My responsibility is to be in the Word of God, not just reading it, but studying it and rightly dividing it so that I can be obedient to that Word and no longer be on the wide path, but be on the narrow path to enter in through the small door. One of my concerns is that people sitting in church who think that they're saved because of everything that they're doing will wake up and not be where they wanted to be. Because remember, as soon as you close your eyes, you leave this earth and you go right into the next realm. For us, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, but for the others, it's not. So that's why I think I was talking to Myra. I said, it seems like every message that when pastors ask me to speak on Sunday always goes back to salvation. Some way, some shape, some form always goes back to salvation. You have to make sure. So anyway, so we see that that Bildad is hanging on to the wisdom of the ancients and his own belief system. But on the other hand, we have Job, who's blameless, he's upright, he's fearing God, and he's turning away from evil. He does not sin with his lips, he holds fast his integrity. This Job of such calamity is being prepared by God to experience God so closely that he will say later in the book, now my eyes have seen you. Eliphaz and Bildad are the only two we've seen so far. They're still very prosperous, but we already know what their relationship is in comparison to what Job's relationship is. Never are they talked about as being blameless or upright or fearing God or running or turning away from evil. So, chapter title, So Lisa put Bildad needs to turn to God, okay?
I didn't have one before, but it seems like now it would make sense that knowledge is not knowing.
I'm sorry, Joe, say that again?
Knowledge is not knowing.
Knowledge is not knowing, okay?
How about the patience of Job continues?
But the patience of Job continues could be the title, chapter title for everyone.
Yeah.
The patience was that he didn't throw his friends out.
Yeah.
He just let them go on and on and on.
You know, I have to say, I sit there and I'm thinking, I wouldn't put up with this. But we weren't in that position. We don't know everything else that's going on. It's very easy for us to say, okay, I would do this or I wouldn't do this. But I would be hard pressed to, are you really my friends? Why are you saying this? Okay, so let me just throw a couple out at you. Bildad said if Job were upright, God would restore. Seek God. Okay, chapter 9. We're going to be done. I'm happy. Chapter 9. And I just want to tell y'all here to remember Job and his friends are totally unaware of what's going on behind the scenes. They are unaware of God's ultimate purpose. Remember, Satan has a purpose for Job, but God also has a purpose for Job in all of this. Okay, so let's look at verse 1. It says, then Job answered. So we see that he's continuing to his reply to Bildad. In truth, I know that this is so. I know that God is just and righteous. I experientially know God. But how can a man be right before God? If one wished to dispute with him, he could not answer him once in 1,000 times. When we look at this, the sentence structure and everything of this, what Job is doing, he says, this is set up like a court of law. He says, if I could question God and he in turn questioned me, I could never even begin to answer one question that God would give to me. What do we know about him? He's wise in heart and he's mighty in strength. Who has defied him without harm? It is God who removes mountains, they know not how, when he overturns them in his anger. Now let's just stop there for a minute. When it talks about who has defied him without harm, that's meaning I have not hardened myself. A person who will harden himself against God, they are the one who's really in trouble. Don't harden yourself. When it talks about righteousness, that God is just and that God is righteousness, there's two there's two different ways that righteousness is presented in Scripture, and one is human righteousness, and the other is the righteousness of God. So a man can be righteous in a relative sense, where he can be properly as righteous among men as both Noah was in Genesis and as Job is in Job. So they are considered righteous men. Remember that blameless, righteous, horizontal, not vertical, is horizontal. Okay, so that's what that kind of righteousness is. Because what did God say about Noah? That you were found righteous among all the men, so that's why I'm preserving you. And the second one is a man can be righteous in a legal sense. In other words, he's declared and considered righteous by God through faith. And we see that in Romans 5:19. So we have the horizontal and we have the vertical, okay? Verse 2, he says, I know God is just and righteous, and I know him. What Job is saying is, I primarily wanted to know if I've not been righteous enough to escape the judgment of God. And if I, Job, who has been declared righteous, who have lived this moral life, haven't escaped the judgment of God, then who has? Who has? Okay? So what seems to be the bottom line or the ultimate question is, what's the most important? How can man find God's approval, and how can man be considered righteous and not guilty before God? Because Job has done everything that he knows to do and has lived his life in a manner that should have, he thought, been pleasing to God. And he's telling me, he says, look, I can't debate him, because if I try to debate God, he's going to demand answers. So when we see the word dispute or contend or debate here, it's a technical term for how you conduct a lawsuit. He says, I can't bring a lawsuit against God. What am I going to, how? Verse 4, he's wise in heart, he's mighty in strength, and who has defied him without harm? Job has agreed with the basic premise of Bildad, that one is never blessed by hardening oneself against God. Job did not think this principle applied to him in this situation because he knew his heart and that he had not hardened himself to God. Bildad doesn't know his heart, but Job does know his heart, and he does know that he has not hardened it against God. 5, it is God who removes the mountains. I tell you what, when I did this part this morning, and I everybody's different, but I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, oh Lord, forgive me for thinking you smaller than you are. Because listen to this, it is God who removes the mountains, and the mountains don't know how it's happening. But when he overturns them in his anger, who shakes the earth out of its place? Who makes the pillars tremble? Who commands the sun not to shine? Who seals up the stars so that you can't see them, basically? Who alone stretches out the heavens? Who tramples down the waves of the sea? Who makes the bear Orion and the Pleiades and the chambers of the south? Who does great things, unfathomable and wondrous works without number? Were he to pass by me, I would not see him. Were he to move past me, I would not perceive him. Were he to snatch away, who could restrain him? Who could say to him, what are you doing? We think we have so much control over everything. We have control over nothing. Absolutely nothing. Job is saying right here, I know what you say is true. But my problem is, how am I going to stand before God and plead my case? I know that he's just. I know that he's righteous. But his wisdom is so vast and so great. How in the world am I going to question him? God is infinite. I'm finite. I know he surrounds me, but I don't see him. I can't perceive him. I can't touch him. Job is saying, why is God so hard to figure out? I know the problem seems simple to you, my friends. You think I've sinned in some way and that this is why disaster has come upon me. But I know my own heart. I know my own integrity. I know that God is not as simple to figure out. Because when I consider who I am, what I am, how in the world can I stand before God? How can I justify myself before God? How can I plead my case to justify myself? Stop and think about it. Now, this I want to tell you. I personally have started seeing bits and pieces of Jesus. When you go down, it says, and tramples down the waves of the sea. Jesus walked on water. Who makes the bear Orion, the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south? A star is what led people to Jesus' birth. Who does great things, unfathomable and wondrous works without number. Jesus did uncountable miracles. Were he to pass by me, I would not see him. Were he to move past me, I would not perceive him. Jesus walked through angry crowds and as if he were invisible. That's John 8:59. Who can say to him, what are you doing? Mark 12:34. God will not turn back his anger. Jesus showed righteous anger. Beneath him crouched the helpers of Rahab. Evil spirits were prostrate at his feet. That's Mark 3:11. So let's go ahead and just keep your eyes out as we go on and start see if you see any messianic foreshadowings in there. Now listen, you can take that for what it's worth, what I just gave you. So it's not etched in stone there. God will not turn back his anger. Beneath him crouch the helpers of Rahab. How then can I answer him and choose my words before him? Now, Rahab was a sea monster. And in Babylonian myth, he was defeated by Marduk. And then Marduk took all of his helpers as captives. And also, this is also Leviathan in Job 7:12. Now, if you stop and think about it, what did Jesus do? All of the evil spirits are actually under his feet. And when he comes back to rule as King of Kings, Satan and his minions will be prostrated before him, as well as every person who did not proclaim the name that Jesus was the Son of God, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And then he says, how am I supposed to choose my words? God, you're righteous, you're mighty. I just don't understand how you're going to use that righteousness or your might to help me. My only option is to throw myself on your mercy. But even if I do, I'm not confident that you would listen to me, even if I speak. For though I were right, this is verse 15, for though I were right, I could not answer. I would have to implore the mercy of my judge. If I called and he answered me, I could not believe that he was listening to my voice, showing once again that there's no confidence that God would even listen to him. For he bruises me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. He will not allow me to get my breath, but saturates me with bitterness. If it is a matter of power, behold, he is a strong one. And if it's a matter of justice, who can summon him? Though I am righteous, my mouth will condemn me. Though I am guiltless, he will declare me guilty. Let's stop right there. So what Job is telling us right there is he is righteous. God is righteous. God is mighty. He argues that he's afraid that when he starts to talk to God, this is verse 20, he says, I'm just afraid I would become confused and I would become a witness against myself. Job is not counting on his righteous position in the court of heaven. He's basically saying, okay, if God calls me up, if I would have it within myself to say, okay, God, we need to talk about this, and he called me up to heaven, I would be so confused that I couldn't even give him a straight answer, and my mouth would even trip me up as I tried to speak to him. In other words, I'd be a little tongue-tied and not sure what I'm going to say. So Job's righteous position is basically nothing, because what is he? This is horizontal. Job's righteousness is horizontal right now. So that's not going to count for anything in the court of heaven. In Job 9:20, it says that if a man justifies himself with his own mouth will condemn him. And Romans 8:33 and 34 tells us if God justifies man, then no man can condemn him. So we see one side and the other side. We see the declared righteous, and then we see man's righteous. Verse 21, I am guiltless. I do not take notice of myself. I despise my life. It is all one. Therefore I say, he destroys the guiltless and the wicked. If the scourge kills suddenly, he mocks the despair of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of its judges. If it's not he, then who is it? From Job's standpoint, there's only one understandable conclusion, that God destroys the blameless along with the wicked. These are two opposites. But Job keeps fretting that I'm innocent and look what's happening to me. So we see Job, his spiritual crisis is developing even more. And what he's doing here is he's describing how the world looks to him. Right now, this is how the world looks to him, that God destroys the righteous with the wicked, that he neglects the innocent and doesn't seem to answer their prayers, and he even takes pleasure in their ruin. And Job at this point has a misapprehension of who God is. And I can understand. I truly can. And Tozer says this: the most important thing about you is what comes into your mind when you think about God. If you have not read A.W. Tozer, I recommend that you get any of his books. He's wonderful. But anyway, so when you're going through something, I'm going to pick on Mary because she's just gone through tragedy too. When you're going through something, what is your mind saying about God? What are you thinking about him?
All I can do is say, help me God, help me.
So what is she doing? She's turning to him for help. She's not saying, God, why are you allowing this? And that's what I wanted, because I knew that's what she said. And that's what you do. You know, we've all gone through different things. And sometimes our first reaction has been, how could you let this happen to me? And then we have to say, oh, Father, forgive me. And then you have to get your mind lined right back up with what the Word says about who he is and who he is in you and to you. And that's Job's suffering deeply. So, you know, his mind is a little, okay, God, do you really allow the innocent to be destroyed with the wicked? Do you really not care? And do you really not answer prayer? I just don't understand. Verse 21, it says, I am guiltless. I do not take notice of myself. I despise my life. It is all one. Therefore I say he destroys the guiltless and the wicked. If the scourge kills suddenly, he mocks the despair of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of its judges. If it is not he, then who is it? Now my days are swifter than a runner. They flee, they see no good. So from Job's standpoint, Job feels like his life is passing away so quickly. And one aspect is dragging because he's in such pain. There's such things going on. But in the other direction, he thinks it's going so quickly because it's spinning and running completely out of control. He feels like he's being chased by a hostile predator. His days would be over, and God would leave him the whole matter. He's concerned that his days will be over and that God will leave the whole matter in his mind totally unsolved. He felt that he was already tired and tried and condemned, and it would do him no good at all, to try to cleanse himself. And we're going to go over to that in just a minute. He says, now my days are swifter than a runner. They flee away, they see no good. How many of us wake up in the morning and feel like the wheels are spinning, but we're going nowhere? That's kind of what this is, okay? They slip by like reed boats, like an eagle that swoops on its prey. Though I say I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my sad countenance and be cheerful. I am afraid of all my pains. I know that you will not acquit me. I'm accounted wicked. Why then should I toil in vain? If I should wash myself with snow and cleanse my hand with lye, yet you would plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes would abhor me. So when he's looking, Job just feels like, he says, okay, I'm going to get as clean as I can possibly get, but even if I use lye, if I use the strongest of the soaps, what's going to cleanse me from this? What's going to get this matter resolved before God? And when it talks about washing with snow, because snow came from heaven, it was considered to be more spiritual and more pure. And lye was the strongest soap that there is. How many people think that they can live a morally good life and go to heaven because I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't cuss, I don't beat my wife, I don't run around, I've raised my kids right, I give to the community. They were washed in snow and lye, but they're not clean before God, and that's the whole point of that right here. I have been tried, I have been condemned, and I cannot get myself cleaned up enough to do anything. And even if I could get clean, I'm not clean enough before you, and I'd wind up right back in the pit of filth, and my clothes wouldn't even want to come on my body, that I would be so dirty. Verse 32. For he is not a man as I am that I may answer him, that we may go to court together. There is no umpire between us who may lay his hand upon us both. Let him remove his rod from me, and let not the dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak and not fear him, but I am not like that in myself. This is another great passage right here. It says, look, there's nobody to stand between us.
Not yet.
Got it, Joe. Listen, man has always tried to bring God down to his level. But here Job is stating God's not a man. He can't be brought down. If we could bring God down to our level, then we'd be able to order him around and not glorify him. He would be nothing more than our genie in a bottle to grant our every wish or our every desire. In Romans chapter 1, if y'all haven't read the book of Romans, I know I'm getting off on a tangent. If y'all have not read the book of Romans, at least go read the first 3 chapters. I mean, just read them. Okay, so anyway, in Romans 1 states that professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and they began to worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who was blessed forever and ever. In other words, Tower of Babel, Nimrod, Nebuchadnezzar, the golden image, the ziggurat. We're going to go up there and bring him down so that he's going to do exactly what we want. But Job understands the distance between himself and God, and he's crying out for a mediator, another legal term. He needs someone to bridge the gap, and his crying out is a good thing. It shows that Job is looking outside of himself for answers. And it wasn't his joy and his happiness that brought him to this point. It was his grief. His grief has brought him to this place. In 1 Timothy 2:5, it says that we see what Job has been longing for is fulfilled in Jesus. For there is one God and one mediator between God and man, and that is the man, Christ Jesus. He's crying out for a mediator, and we have our mediator. Job starts out this chapter with a law, or the court, and here concluding this chapter, what he has a desire for, and we have the picture of a mediator to end this dispute. So what does a mediator do in court? He reaches from this side to this side, wanting the best in the middle, so that both parties are happy. God knew we were lost, dead in our transgressions and our sins. Jesus was obedient to death on the cross, so he became the mediator between that gulf, so that when the accuser accuses us, he says, taken care of, under the blood, they're mine. God says, perfect. So Job wanted that mediator, and that's a foreshadowing of it, and that's what we get. So we see that his desire for a mediator does come to fruition in Christ. Now, the word for rod here in verse 34 also means scepter. So another possibility of the translation of this verse is that Job is referring to God sitting in his majesty upon the judgment seat. And if we can look at or imagine God sitting on the judgment seat, it was filling him with terror. For us, it's going to be Jesus sitting on the bema seat, not the judgment seat. We are at the bema seat, not the great white throne judgment. Okay? So what do we have for a chapter title here?
It was simple. Job is just a man, but God is God.
I like that. Job is just a man, but God is God. Anybody else? Okay. How about Job asked how he could answer God? Just throwing them out. Do whatever. Once again, whatever allows you to bring this back to your recall. Okay, chapter 10. Let's read verses 1 through 7. It says, okay, when we look at this is poetry, and verses 1 through 7 is called Job's complaint. In other words, it's his moaning to God for compassion. So verses 1 through 7. I loathe my own life. I will give full vent to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. That means misery, not sourness. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend with me. Is it right for you indeed to oppress, to reject the labor of your hands, and to look favorably on the schemes of the wicked? Have you eyes of flesh, or do you see as a man sees? Are your days as the days of a mortal, or your years as a man's years, that you should seek for my guilt and search after my skin? According to your knowledge, I am indeed not guilty, yet there is no deliverance from your hand. Job is pleading with God to tell him why he's contending with him in such a severe manner, because based on Job's knowledge of the true God, he has not changed his lifestyle or his relationship since the time that he was prosperous and abundant. And God knew that. So therefore, Job is challenging him with a series of questions. He's attempting to discover why God is afflicting him in such a manner. So the implication of his first question is, why, God, are you acting unjustly to him? I'm your creation. But you're also looking favorably upon the schemes of evil men. And he goes on through verses 4 through 6 and questioning him, are you acting like a human being? And then he goes on and he accuses God basically of knowing that he's not guilty. He's not worthy of these calamities that he's been experiencing, yet there doesn't seem to be any deliverance from him, from God's hands. So we go from, why are you doing this, to, I am your creation, why do you afflict me? So let's look at verses 8. It says, your hands fashioned me and made me all together. That means I was intricately made. Psalm 139:14. You would destroy me. Remember now that you have made me as clay, and would you turn me into dust again? Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? Now I have to tell you guys, that means the act of conception. Clothe me with skin and flesh and knit me together with bones and sinew. You have granted me life and loving kindness, and your care has preserved me. So what he's doing here is Job knows God is the author of creation, and specifically of mankind, and he had the same understanding as the psalmist did in Psalm 139:4. I will praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. He says, you have intricately made me out of clay. You are the master potter, and now you're turning me back to dust? So why have you, the same God who created me, preserved me, and abundantly blessed me, are now so obviously abandoning me? He says, my loving kindness, and now you're abandoning me. He's not really. Verse 13, yet these things you have concealed in your heart. I know that this is within you. If I sin, then you would take note of me and would not acquit me of my guilt. If I am wicked, woe to me. And if I am righteous, I dare not lift up my head. I am sated and disgraced and conscious of my misery. Should my head be lifted up, you would hunt me like a lion. And again, you would show your power against me. You renew your witnesses against me and increase your anger toward me. Hardship after hardship is with me. Oh, poor Job. Poor Job. God, you know all the causes and all the answers for my condition. Why are you not telling me? I don't understand the things that are happening. Oh, God, just look upon my affliction. And tonight, extend me some mercy. God, you oppose me like a lion, showing me your power and your anger. And if I should speak on my behalf, you would bring witnesses against me, and your anger would increase. It's hardship after hardship. It's attack after attack. And then he cries out in verses 18 through 22, why then have you brought me out of the womb? Once again, why was I born? Would that I had died and no eye had seen me. I should have been as though I had not been, carried from womb to tomb. Would he not let my few days alone withdraw from me that I may have a little cheer? Before I go, and I shall not return, to the land of darkness and deep shadow, the land of utter gloom as darkness itself, of deep shadow without order, and which shines as the darkness. He's crying out, why have you brought me from the womb? I don't see any sense in this. Please just leave me alone. Don't recognize me. But Job doesn't understand that it's only because God does recognize him and does not leave him alone that he has endured and has not been completely destroyed by either the devil or his own despair. Job has never said that God is cruel. He just states the facts. It looks as though God is rejecting him without reason, and he doesn't understand. His desire is for a few days of cheer, just a little reprieve before death. He again ends on a gloomy note, referencing death. And that brings us to the end of chapter 10. So give me a title for chapter 10. Nobody has a title.
I just put, what is the purpose of this life?
What is the purpose of this life? And sometimes that's exactly how we feel. Anybody else? This one wasn't as hard as some of the others. Why do you contend with me? Why was I born? Okay. For those of you who did your work, were there any questions in your homework that did not get answered in class tonight, since we have just a minute? Everybody was good? Okay, good. So how did you find the lesson this week compared to last week? Harder? Well, the poetry is difficult because that's not how we live. So yes, just persevere is all I can say. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, we'll just go ahead and pray and see you Sunday. Father, I thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Lord, even though the poetry is difficult for us to mine at times, we know that the power and the presence of your Holy Spirit within each and every one of us will bring us the revelation that you desire for us to have. Lord, I just ask that you help each and every one of us to remember that Job only had a certain portion of the revelation of you and of his life that you have given us. He doesn't have the New Testament. He has what has been handed down from Adam to Noah to possibly Abraham. And Lord, thank you that you will illumine our eyes, that we can see your truth, and that we know that you do surround us and we do perceive you because you are in us and working through us. And I just give you glory in Jesus' name. Amen.